I'm Caitlin Bailey, the host of the Oldest Profession podcast, where every episode we do a deep dive into an old pro from history. Our mission is to tell better sex worker stories, and our vision is to change the stories people tell about sex workers, because changing the story changes everything.
These sacred stories we share more.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts or visit theoldestprofessionpodcast.com.
Steady and knowing we've never been alone here. Reclaim the story, make vibrations.
Welcome to the Peepshow podcast
News and stories from the sex industry
with Jessie and PJ Sage. Welcome back to another episode of the Peepshow podcast. This is a very special collaboration with the Oldest Profession podcast, where we are talking about stories of coming out as a sex worker.
Hey, I'm Adrian, one of the hosts of After Adult Podcast. My porn name should be Mozart Fremont, but you probably know me better by my actual porn name, Siri.
I'm Rachel, but my porn name would be Woody 16th Avenue.
After Adult is a podcast about life and porn.
I don't actually watch porn.
I don't really watch that much porn either. I probably watch more than you, but I mean, most of the time it kind of would feel like going to work on my day off.
You 100% watch more than me, because I don't watch porn. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for After Adult.
Or visit afteradult.com and follow us on Instagram at afteradult.
This week we have a very special episode. So this week is December 17th, which is a holiday within the sex work community. It's a somber holiday that recognizes and remembers the sex workers that we've lost this year. And in the past, Peepshow has gone to D17 vigils and recorded those. Since there's no in-person meetings this year, Kaytlin Bailey and I decided to honor the stories of sex workers this year as our contribution to the holiday. So we focus on the stories of coming out and honor those who have decided to live out loud as sex workers and all of the beauty and complications that comes with that. I don't want to take up much time because I want to give space to the contributors who sent in their stories. I also do want to say, though, that we couldn't take all of the stories. There just wasn't enough time. So if you don't hear your story represented here, we still thank you so much for sending them, and we are collecting them because Kaytlin and I are planning on doing this next year as well. One brief note before we get started, one of the contributors we talk about as Zoe, and since we recorded the episode, he has come out with a new name, Xenon Universe. So we didn't know that when we recorded it, but we are really, really happy for Xenon for coming out and changing their name, and we are happy to include that here. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy these stories. Now is a good time to hit the pause button and head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Even $1 a month shows us that you care and want to see Peepshow continue to thrive. Also, you can help increase our reach with a review on iTunes.
How are we out? Let's talk about how out we are.
I am so out. Like, I don't have anybody really in my life that doesn't know. I didn't really anticipate being like as out as I am. I think part of it is that I started writing under my sex work name. And then I got offered to write a column in a Pittsburgh paper about like my work. And I had to decide at that point, like, how out am I going to be? And, just became completely out about things. And that's actually not the way that everybody found out, but I came out in different ways to like family and friends, but that's at this point, I don't have anybody who doesn't know, and that's like a very complicated thing.
I hear you on that. I feel like you and I both did similar things in that, like, I
Mhm.
came out to first crowds of strangers, like,
Yeah.
in comedy spaces, and then crowds of strangers in, like, personal essays and, internet and performing my
Right.
one-woman show, which is about coming out to my dad, and I did all of
Mhm.
that before I came out to anyone in my immediate family because I just knew that they wouldn't be supportive, and so I feel like I had to
Yeah.
sort of build this, like, artistic community,
Yeah. Mhm.
before I felt like I could sort of go to my family. I wrote, produced, and promoted, Contagious in, like, 2015. If you stop talking to your parents, they'll Google you. And so my parents found out about my sex work because of my aggressive self-promotion of this,
Right. Mhm.
of this one-woman show. And my
Yeah.
mom summoned me back to North Carolina, basically, and we had this, like, family therapy session.
Oh, wow. She actually called a
Oh,
therapist?
yeah, yeah, yeah. She called the therapist. Well, she's been sending me to therapists, like, my whole life. Like, a big theme in my childhood is, like, "You are broken. We must fix
Mm.
you."
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
my mom said, "I can't believe you sold your body." And I said, "I didn't. I still have it." And the therapist laughed. Um and I consider, and that was sort of that was the only time that we've really talked about it directly. And then she sent me to, like, talk to my dad, who, is a man entombed, trapped really by, like, his
Mhm.
own, like, by toxic masculinity. We had this family therapy thing with my mom where my mom, like, loses to jokes, right? And then she drops me off at my father's house, or I mean, like, they live together. She drops me off at the house
Yeah.
and, like, bounces. And then my dad and I got super drunk because we have very healthy coping mechanisms, and no problem communicating whatsoever. And we had this, like, fantastic philosophical conversation about how, like, every child disappoints their parents, and, like,
Uh-huh.
children are arrows and you shoot them and you don't know where they land and the best that you can hope for, and blah. And I was like, cool, we've accepted each other. Like, you used to murder people for
Yeah.
money. I used to make people come for money. We're all a part of this family. We can live with each other. And then I wrote my Vice article coming
Uh-huh.
out. And then my dad called me and was like, "I thought you were talking about your abortion." I was like, "I don't have any complicated feelings about my abortion." So I essentially live in, like, a don't ask, don't tell family, and then married into another don't ask, don't tell family because my husband's family are, like, extreme conservative Baptists. Like, he
Yeah,
comes from
yeah.
a multi-generational family of missionaries, so my husband and I are super chill, but there's
Yeah.
no
Mhm.
place in my extended family, either in my family of origin or in my husband's family, to talk about the work that I'm so proud of, to talk about my professional
Yeah.
accomplishments, to talk about the stuff that I do, because it's this, like, third rail of sexual shame, and nobody knows how to talk about it.
I know, I was gonna ask you about that because this is how I feel about this. And I think the fact that you came out in this, like, very public way and we're both, like, public people, I feel like I have this career that is hyper, hyper visible, but in my, like, personal life, it's, like, shrouded in an
Yes.
invisibility.
Yes.
And and there's something very strange about that, like, dichotomy. So
Yeah.
I am kind of a workaholic and I have tons of projects going on. PJ and I both, we work together, we do
Mhm.
all kinds of things. And then we go to family events and we pretend like we sit around and I
Do
don't
nothing.
know,
Yeah.
do nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And people know, but they don't wanna ask, and they
yeah.
don't wanna talk about it, and we just get, like, kinda passed over. You're at a family event, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is happening at work, and this is blah, 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 and this is happening," and then just Jessie and PJ passed right over, like,
Yep.
nobody
Nobody wants to talk about
uh
it, and they make that very clear, it's not,
Yeah.
and you can feel that tension, and I feel like it's
Yeah.
not just my sex worker spidey sense that tell me that, like, this isn't safe, and
Right.
I feel that way with, like, with my family, with my mother specifically. So I feel the sex shame
Mhm.
from my dad, and I'm just like, "He's been through enough." And my mom, the only thing she wants to know about my professional creative career is whether or
Mhm.
not I'm making money. So it's like we can't,
Oh,
like,
interesting.
so right,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, "Well, mom, if you care about money, I boy boy, do I have news for you." So it's I'm performing more at family gatherings than I am performing on stage, where I'm more honest with my audiences of strangers than I am with like my family.
Absolutely, I am too, and so my dad comes to visit. I rarely see my dad, but a couple of years ago, my dad comes to visit. We're walking around, like, the university area, I'm showing him the city, and then because I used to write for this alt weekly that had, like, the paper on every corner, I pass by it and I say to my dad, like, "Oh, this is the paper that I write for," and he looks at me and he's like, "You write for a paper?" And I was like, "Yes," and then that was it. He didn't ask me about it.
Yeah,
He wasn't like,
yeah,
"Oh, can I see your article?" Nothing.
right.
Flat.
And it's
We're done.
and
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 it's like, "Wow, okay."
right, I hate that because it's like, daddy issues is such a fucking dumb trope.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I say that and I feel this, like, tension in myself as I'm talking because now at this point, 5 years into this is the space that we're at. At the beginning, this, like, don't ask, don't tell is where we've landed.
Yeah.
It was way more hostile than that, like, at the beginning,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember like, that's almost like, "Oh, this is great. We've landed in this place where I pretend like I'm a housewife,"
Right,
but,
right. But I can come
the
home.
right, but at the beginning, like, I remember going to events, like family events, walking up to a group and having people stand up and leave. It
Yeah.
was like that at the beginning. And I think that I really am glad that I'm out. I think that
Mhm.
I'm not built to live like a double life. I just can't do it. But I think that there's also ways in which it's hard because then in every one of your interactions, like, at least I find this, that people are, like, reading sex work into that, and there's a way in which it's very, like, reductive.
Yeah, I hear that. I remember being so terrified, like, as I was writing Contagious, right?
Mhm.
Where I both maintained the self-delusion that this was a tiny play happening in New York and, my parents would never hear about it all the way in North Carolina, right? Which is, like, not how things work.
Mm.
But, like, I maintained that belief and also knew that my father would commit suicide, right? So, like, I mean, I remember
Mhm.
just being plagued with, like, guilt and anxiety and nausea and fear and, like, waking up in the middle of the night in like, this cold sweat anxiety of, like,
Yeah. Mhm.
I reject this shame, but I don't know that I could live with the contextual impact of this information, right? Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
I don't think that I did anything wrong, but I
Right.
understand the cultural context that
Right.
people
Mhm.
come to this with, and it can be devastating and it can be heartbreaking. But I
Yeah.
also
Mhm.
firmly believe, as I came out to escape an abusive relationship because I was with a man that I felt in my body would kill me, and it-
Wow.
one
Mhm.
of the things that he was using was this threat of outing me.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
I have this personality, and so I went the other way, but it very much was a defense. I knew that I had to surround myself with people that already knew in order to stay safe. And I think that that's a
Yeah.
theme, that we see throughout. We should talk about what we're doing with this episode, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. December 17th is coming up. It's an annual holiday in the sex work community, the International Day to End Violence against Sex Workers. And it's a sacred and solemn event where we gather together physically or digitally
Mhm.
to read the names of,
Right.
of those that we've lost. And I think that this is going to be a really hard winter for all kinds of
Yeah.
folks, but especially for sex workers
Mhm.
who might be feeling isolated and desperate. And we just wanted to share stories about coming out to our community because
Mhm.
we believe that in owning our own stories, we can create a safer world for sex workers, both as individuals and also collectively.
We elicited stories from other people in our community who have, came out in different ways, who have had different sorts of experiences, who do different sorts of sex work, to talk about like coming out, but also to talk about sex work as the umbrella that encompasses a lot of
Mhm.
different sorts of erotic labor. And we tried really hard to represent that in the people who
Mhm.
submitted stories.
And we want to make this an annual event. So, You know,
Yeah.
if you feel inspired, or you have you know, a coming out story that you want to share, or a story about sex work, please continue to send those stories in to Peepshow or The Oldest Profession, and we will continue to collaborate and bringing these stories
Yeah,
through.
definitely. And I do want to say we could not include all of the stories. And that
Mhm.
isn't, if your story wasn't included, it's not because there was anything wrong with it. There's only so much time, and we
Yep.
appreciate everybody who sent stories in. So let's get started with one of those stories. So the first story that we're going to share with you all is from Cactus Cutie.
I am a sex worker and photographer and just all around cutie with a K. I first came out as a porn performer to actually an older cousin of mine who's more like a mother figure. And I felt comfortable coming out to her because she just seemed to have more of an open view about sex work in general, the way that she's talked about it in the past. So I kind of just sneakily kind of made my way into trying to figure out how she would feel. And then I finally came out and said that I am one of those people who do porn. And thankfully, she's an actress. So the first thing she asked me was, oh my gosh, who's directing it? Who are the actors? Tell me everything about the behind the scenes. Like, she wanted to know about the production side of it. It warmed my heart that the first thing she wasn't asking was, are you safe? Are you okay? Why are you doing this? It was more like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. That's wonderful. When I chatted with her more about it and telling her, just people need some extra loving in this world. And she said, I totally agree. I get it. I understand. I have been one of those people before. I've been lonely and needing some attention and love. So I love that you're doing that. So that gave me a little bit of confidence to be able to tell my mom about a year later. I was visiting home for the holidays and we were on a trip. And then, boy, it was a very long road trip. And I just decided, I don't think she understands what I'm doing. I've been a boudoir photographer the last 4, 5, 6 years, maybe. But I was a photographer for fashion and e-commerce and stuff like that. So she really loved that type of photography. But until I started doing boudoir, she really started questioning like why I was doing these things, why I had to be shooting naked women. I mostly shot women and femmes. And then also just accusing me of exploiting them on my Patreon, OnlyFans, whatever, because I was making money off of their quote unquote bodies. Obviously, that's not what sex work is or being a photographer is, especially if both sides are consensual and we're both making money off of it. Anyways, from that point of view, I had always been worried about telling my mom. And the way that I told her, like I said, was in a car. It was a very long drive and it was very uncomfortable. She was crying while she was driving. It was terrible. It was not a good time to tell her, but I'm glad I did. She didn't respond in the best way. She was mostly concerned, and she just since then has asked me never to bring anything up, not to mention what I do. I've just been kind of like saying I'm going on photo shoots. I'm doing these kind of things. So very beating around the bush, quote unquote, my bush. I'm a hairy girl. But we had that conversation and she just hasn't been that great since. But I want to report she retired this year and she has also gotten into her spirituality a bit more. And she's finally realizing that she doesn't have control about what I do. And if this is something that truly makes me happy, she wants to know about it. And she told me this like maybe 2 weeks ago. And I'm still floating on air because even though we haven't talked about it yet, the fact that she wants to hear about it, the fact that she knows that it makes me happy and she wants to understand why, even if we don't have that conversation, just her being comfortable with me doing this job and wanting to know why it makes me happy, because it does. It just truly meant the world. It really did. There is some good light at the end of the tunnel, and there's always a silver lining somewhere, somehow, at least in my situation. I truly just want to give love to every sex worker out there who doesn't have a supportive parent or guardians or friends, because I know how hard it can be. Even, I've had small experiences, but I can't imagine having somebody who wasn't as comfortable, or at least, willing to be comfortable about it. So, I'm happy to share this story. Thank you so much for giving me this platform to be able to chat about it and to give other sex workers the opportunity to share their stories as well, because I believe that our stories are so, so important. And they're the reasons that people are going to start understanding us and accepting our happiness and our jobs. Or if we're not happy, that's fine too. Sex work is also a job. So yeah, anyways, thank you so much, Peep Show. You the best. Mwah.
Mwah.
I know, it's so sweet.
Yeah. Oh man.
I was thinking as she was talking, like, she picked up on one of the things that we were talking about in terms of invisibility and being
Yeah.
asked to, like, hide a major part of yourself.
Right. Yeah. Just to make things nice for everyone. Just erase yourself.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, and
right.
we know we've done this to queer communities and I mean, artists have suffered from this. I mean, it feels like generational. It feels archetypal. It feels like this is just sort of part of the struggle.
Mhm.
For sex workers and for people generally carving their own path. Our parents, I
Right.
think, want us
Mhm.
to be safe often more than they want us to be happy, if that makes sense. Like
Right. Yeah.
the fear overwhelms the
Yeah.
ambition, and it's kind of our job to listen to the voice inside of our head, and to
Right.
learn to
Mhm.
parent ourselves and to learn
Right.
to advocate for our own happiness. I was so moved by Cactus's empathy for
Mhm.
her mother in that like hard car ride, and the grace that she was able to extend to her
Yeah.
for her mom
Mhm.
to find the space that she needed to come around in her own way. I think often when we, especially with parents, we expect so much from them because they're our parents, and so
Yeah.
when right, yeah,
Right.
when they react
Mhm.
negatively, it we can want to, it's very tempting, I think, to want to hold on to that or to shut down, or to
Yeah.
back away.
Mhm.
But I really thought it demonstrated so much, yeah, grace and maturity
Yeah.
on Cactus's part
Mhm.
to like let her mother feel her feelings, and from a place of
Yeah.
security herself, right? She'd already gotten validation from her cousin and her peer group and social media, which I think is
Right.
so important.
Mhm.
And then she was able to wait for her mother to get over her shit, which I think is just really
Yeah.
awesome.
Really lovely. Yeah,
Really
and to
lovely.
feel joy in it and not to feel like, oh, because there's different ways that you can react to that. You can be like, "Oh, well, it's nice that you accept me now," or you could do what she did,
Mhm.
which is to cry tears of joy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really lovely. I also think it's important at the end that, she talked about the fact that, not all sex workers do like being sex
Mhm.
workers, and to talk about sex work in terms just of like empowerment or
Mhm.
money or, the ways in which, we defend our choices because we're forced to defend our choices over and over and over again. I think there also needs to be space to say, this is a hard job
Right.
or I don't necessarily like this and not have that be used as a weapon
Right,
like
exactly,
against us.
Yeah, it's like, you don't want to go through the emotional labor of getting your mom like sort of comfortable with you giving work updates and then come back and be like, I had a hard day at work. And it's like, see, I told you, you're being exploited. You're
Right.
basically a sex slave. Right? Yeah. And so that feeling,
Right.
it's like, well, I also
And
felt
you're like,
shitty as a
no,
waitress,
I
mom. Like,
you're like, I just didn't want to
right.
talk
Yeah.
about this person's marriage again today. That's it.
Oh, man. Well, Cactus, please keep us posted, on how things go with your mom, and know that we're rooting for you.
Yeah, so let's go on to the next story. The next one is from Samantha Joe, who actually also talks about an experience with her mother. Like, there's a theme here. Mothers are powerful people.
Yeah, moms are hard.
Hi, my name is Samantha Joe Data. As a former sex worker and someone who is Black and trans, a trans femme who has done sex work since the early 90s, these experiences of coming out being outed by my friends, families, and colleagues are so personal to me. I remember first doing sex work in a community of trans women that were looking out for each other. There was healthy competition about pulling dates or who they wanted, but we looked out for each other. You couldn't come on to our block, or you couldn't be an outsider without being okayed by one of us. So that is one version of it. Also, I remember when my mother first found out I was doing sex work. I grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Besides the lights and the glamour of it all, there's a very intimate, small Black community. Majority Black, but Atlantic City is racially divided and divided by HUD or project homes. And everyone came to the strip and drove down the strip, which was Pacific Avenue. And I remember being out there and someone spotting me and it getting back to my mother. My mother's brother, my uncle, came out and was like, "Your mother told me to come get you and you couldn't be here." And I remember having that hard conversation with my mother about what I was doing outside at 2 o'clock in the morning, dressed very provocatively. And I was just honest. I was outside getting it. Like, was taking care of myself at this time, or mainly taking care of myself, still under her roof. And it led to me leaving. She couldn't say anything about anything that I did because I wasn't under her roof. And that was the number one thing she said: under my roof, my rules. So I got from under her roof and got into her rules with no understanding of finances, no understanding of savings or any of those things because I have been surviving for so long. But it was a hard conversation and it trickled down throughout the family. And then I remember my discretion and how discreet I used to be or tried to be. It was important as a sex worker to understand between my clients and my friends. A lot of clients were still nice then or perceived to be nice. They all had their own intentions and motives. But to understand that, like, I separated work and family, and I also went to sex work like I went to any other job with all of my work, like my condom, my clear donation, and my ask. I made sure that someone knew exactly where I was at, and I was honest. I was open enough to tell my immediate circle and my immediate friends what I was doing because there was this thing about not living long, and in my head, I didn't know where my death date would end, and it hasn't. And I expect to continue to live, but in your head, without any education or any grooming to prepare for a future, how can you plan for one? So while I was doing this daunting job that, was transferring so many energies, still coming or still not addressing my sexual trauma, I had to lean on my friends a lot of the times to get up and make it work and try to find some kind of solace or some kind of peace in all of this. So sex work has definitely allowed me to be creative. I rode the wave from sex work, from escort services to street work to back page ads to call girl ads to phone sex operators to BDSM to fantasy play. All of those things I've covered or I've done. Then I understood that there was much more lucrative money when the pools dried up. So I started hitting the other hot spots, like up and down the East Coast, in the Midwest, and started to travel with the work. So I kind of always stayed in contact with someone, or I always was partnered with someone. And we made our own happy place. We made our own adventures and excitement out of it. Not only were we using each other for protection and support and to flip the bill and safety, but we were also creating moments and memories that didn't traditionally happen around a tree or around a dinner table, but they are still memories that we talk about and that have bonded us and put us together. Some of my dearest friends, my most show up, show out friends come from the same line of sex work that I am. I'm calling upon them, even if they've moved on or are still engaging, there's an ear to the ground and this love whisper that always finds each other like, come here, what are you doing? You okay? And checking in and checking out is important.
Wow.
A love whisper, so beautiful.
I love, yeah, I want to give a shout out. Like Samantha Jo Dato is an incredible, sex worker advocate and organizer in the Bay Area. She's been working really hard with us on the Old Pro project. And one of the things that connected us super, super early was this idea of chosen family that I feel like Samantha has
Mm-hmm.
just so beautifully articulated here, that like,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
all of the things that because we need family, right? Like none of us
Yeah.
are an island unto ourselves. And I think Samantha was absolutely right in that, like, there are skills that we're missing from, adulthood, in terms of like money management or life
Right.
management. And
Yeah.
then this cultural myth, right? That, I love how Samantha was like, I don't know how I got the idea that I wasn't going to live long. It's like, oh, well, because we say that sex workers are
Yeah.
going to die. That's the big cultural message, is like
Right.
that
Yeah.
we've signed up for a death sentence. And
Yeah.
I also really, really appreciated that, when parents people who are scared are scary. And
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
can so clearly see in Samantha's retelling that, like, her mom trying to protect her, but like grasping for control, ends up
Yeah.
doing the
Mm-hmm.
absolute opposite, right? And
Right.
pushing
Drives
pushing
her
her level,
away.
drives her
Yeah.
away, right? Drives
Mm-hmm.
her into more dangerous situations where ultimately, luckily, thank God, Samantha is able to find her support network and has seen so much history of the
Yeah.
changing sex industry over the past 20 plus years, which is just incredible. And
Mm-hmm.
but it's sad. There's a loss
Yeah.
there, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I there is a loss there, but I think there's also, I think, something so like real about sex work community and the way that she talked about coming together and like creating their own like adventure.
Yes. Yes.
Um that was so powerful to me because that's what I see so much of that. People who have complex relationships with their families and complex relationships in general because of the way that we're treated as sex workers, who come together and
Mhm.
do something different, create a different world
Yeah.
for each other. And I love that. And I think you're right. I think there is something sad, and it's like kind of a shame that we're like a group of people that have to do that for each other, but the fact that we do, I think, is also really beautiful.
Sad and exhilarating, right? Because if,
Right. Mhm.
it's like there is this other alternative, right? Where,
Mhm.
maybe if our family of origin was more accepting, we wouldn't have pushed ourselves to become
Yeah.
the glorious
Mhm.
people that we are. And I think that it's,
Mhm.
that sex workers and stepping into that subculture in that space does give us access to these adventures,
Right. Mhm.
these exciting, uh, you know, lifelong friends, as I think Samantha beautifully put
Yeah.
it. When you go
Mhm.
through something with someone, it doesn't matter if 20 years has passed. Like, you're taking that
Yeah.
call. And
Mhm.
there's power there. And if you can't find that with your family of origin, then that doesn't mean that it's not out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let's turn to Mia Lee now because she has a different family story that I think is also really important.
Hi, I'm Mia Lee. I'm a full service escort based in New York and San Francisco. I don't really have a coming out story because I was never in the closet as a sex worker. I came to this country as a child political refugee and grew up in foster care, so I'm not unfamiliar with poverty, but I was fortunate enough to get an education and spend over a decade in a generally happy and lucrative career in finance after college. So by the time I made a career change into escorting, I had quite a bit of privilege, especially financial privilege. certainly enough to not give a crap about societal judgment and approval. I tell people every day that I'm a sex worker or that I'm an escort without a moment's hesitation. I have this staunch, unrepentant stance that there is absolutely nothing wrong with what I'm doing for a living. Escorting is my career and one that I'm damn proud of. I told my foster parents in passing, like, by the way, I quit finance and became a high-end escort. And one of my foster dads was like, oh, great, so you'll have more time to visit. When are you coming down to make that vegetable curry Andrew likes? You know his cholesterol's getting up there. And I sort of see things in such a way that I want society to not just destigmatize sex work, but to normalize and respect it. So I've decided to just live this principle in my day-to-day life. I have a long-term boyfriend, and we're both extremely supportive of each other's careers. He matches all of my SWAP and other sex worker support organization donations. When people ask us what we do for work, we typically nonchalantly reply that he's a tech executive and I'm a high-end escort. I realize that many sex workers don't have the privilege of living in this carefree and out way, but I truly hope that one day society will progress to the point where everyone in my industry can.
Shout out to Mia.
Yeah.
Mia and I are friends because we're both fuck you, watch this people, which I think is like I love that. That's I got a big dose of that, definitely.
I love her foster father's response.
Pro family values, right? Is like having more time to visit with your family is a big and reasonable reason. I think that people do leave. Otherwise,
conventional employment.
Conventional employment, right? I think, it's easy for people to understand of like, oh, I hated making $8 an hour at Starbucks. I would rather, do sex work. But this story is so compelling because, Mia's experience as in the upper echelons of the sort of cutthroat finance department, her spidey sense was like, this is bullshit. This is not how I want to spend my life. I'm making a choice to do sexy things instead, which is better. And to be able to have, a supportive partner and both the like financial and just like cojones, essentially to like make that choice. I think is really incredible. And I do think is not the direct result, right? Like, I have that attitude from a very privileged position and a family of origin, but as a refugee, as somebody coming up in foster care, Mia is someone who has been carving her own path the whole time.
Yeah. I was thinking about this a little bit, and I know there's a lot of problems with foster care programs, but I also know people who've had really like beautiful experiences too. And I was thinking about this as she was talking, like I wonder if that ability from her like foster father to think about family in a different way, to conceptualize it differently, to allow for non-blood family, for chosen family, like also get opened up and gave him like space to accept her work too.
Yeah, agreed. Right, because he was released from this like my daughter bullshit.
You can't universalize about
No, of
anything,
course, of
but I
course.
just think that there's something interesting about that dynamic, and about being willing to raise children, that aren't biologically yours. Like how else are you willing to like reconceptualize life outside of the frameworks of our ideas of like nuclear family and what children are supposed to do?
Yeah, like there's so much love available to all of us if we let go of what should be or like the scripts
Mhm.
that we've all been handed. And I think that's very
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah, and I also think it's really amazing too because I mean, she's breaking a lot of myths, in this short story, but another one is about, and both of us are married, people, about sex workers being unlovable or not being able to have partners who can support them. And she's saying that her partner, matches her swap donations, like that's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's amazing.
But but it's also not unheard of. You
Yeah,
can have partners who support you. And I love hearing stories like that.
same. Thanks for sharing, Mia.
Okay, so we're going to move to Shy Spells.
Hi, this is Shy Spells, and this is about my experience being out as a sex worker. I started sex work back in 2017, and I was out pretty immediately to my immediate family, such as my mom and close friends, because I thought it was really cool. I was very proud of myself for getting into sex work because I wanted to do it for such a long time and I didn't have the confidence or the knowledge that there was a space for someone like me. So I was really proud, and unfortunately, I got to a point where I was telling everyone, and I learned the hard way that you can't tell everyone. Initially, my family was a little surprised because I'm very in like in my regular life, I'm really shy, and I grew up quite very prudish. I used to have a purity ring. Actually, I was very prudish, and then so they were kind of like, oh, like that's surprising, but they were mostly accepting. I did have a one family member who, oh, that's on the internet forever. Do you really want to do that type thing? But I just said, oh, well, thank you for the advice, and I continued to do what I do. However, as I went on and I was feeling more comfortable about what I did, I was telling more and more people, and that led to me getting doxxed by a coworker back in 2000 and last year, I think 2019. And that was a bit disarming because I confided in them because I only told a few people, and I was getting like text messages, people trying to verify if it was true, and that like really hurt my feelings. So it taught me a lesson. You can't tell everyone because unfortunately it's very stigmatized still. And I notice a lot of times people, they'll say, oh, that's so cool that you do that. And then they'll go and behind your back say something else. I had an incident with a doctor. They were talking about my weight. As you know, I'm a fat person, and doctors are how they are about weight. And they were asking me what I did for work, and I said I didn't want to tell them. And they were like, "Oh, we're not here to judge you." So I said I work in the adult industry, and she asked me to elaborate. And I said, I do modeling. And she's like, what do you mean? And so finally I was like, I do porn. And she was like, oh. And long story short, as soon as I said that, she went from, oh, we don't judge to she was definitely judging me. And she was saying that I should not do what I do because it was giving me, it was very fat phobic. Like she essentially told me that what I was doing was glorifying obesity, but that's a different story. So, long story short, I've just learned that although I'm proud of what I do and I don't feel like I should hide what I do, I feel like my job is just like any other job, and I should feel I deserve the same respect of any other job. I feel that people still don't see that, and I think that's my biggest thing that I'm sad about is that I can't be, just say. And when people ask what I do, I have to gauge first: is this somebody I can tell, or am I gonna lie and say I'm a housewife, or say, oh, I work on websites or whatever the case may be. But in general, my close friends and family have been really supportive. I've just learned over the years that you have to be really careful on who you tell. And I hope that one day it won't be so stigmatized and I can tell people and be openly proud of what I do. And I can put it on my resume because I hate when I have gaps in my resume because I'm like, that's not a gap in the resume. I was working, but if I put this on my resume, you're probably not going to hire me.
Oh, wow. I mean, thank
There's
you,
so much
Shai.
there.
Yeah, there's so much there. First, I feel like I want to, I mean, I'm sure all of our listeners of like, holy shit, fuck that doctor, right? Like,
Right.
oh
Mhm.
man. And I do want to point out something that I noticed there that I think, sex workers sort of universally experience is that like, Shai's spidey sense told them not to tell that doctor, right?
Yeah,
Like, I don't
right.
want to tell
Yeah.
you. And the professionalism and like the what we think that we know about doctors and the context or whatever overrode those instincts for
Yeah.
medical
Mhm.
advice and then landed exactly where Shai's body essentially knew
Right.
that was going.
Yeah.
And I just can't. I feel like we ought to take as much social precaution or like when choosing to come out to people, listen to your body the way that you listen to your body with clients, right? Like if the hair on
Right.
the back of your
Right.
neck
Mhm.
stands up, if your stomach is tightening, if your animal body knows when you're in danger, and
Right.
and
Mhm.
always listen to that. It's never worth it to be unsafe.
Yeah. I was thinking too, as I was listening to her, that, at the top of the show, one of the things that I said is, well, I'm out to everybody. Well, that's true, except not really, in the sense that, like, I realized that in ways my world's become like bigger and bigger. I've become part of this like large community of sex workers. I've had access to things and clients and like access to a lot that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise. But I realized that in like my day-to-day life, it shrunk.
Mm.
In this way that like that I resonated with what Shai was saying. So I don't want to make small talk with the people at the pickup line at my kid's school because I just don't know that I want to get into something where I don't think it's necessarily safe. And even if I don't
Mm.
think it's where I know there's going to be like judgment, they could figure out who I was if they wanted to, but I'm not going to necessarily like be so available that those conversations, like come
Mhm.
on. I think it's just like very complicated, I think, especially as a mother. Now that I think about it, like what we didn't represent in these stories is like talking about parenting and being like an
Mm.
out parent and the complications of that. That there's a way in which what she's saying makes, I get because it's not safe with everybody.
Yeah.
And even if you're not in physical danger, just being like judged is
Mhm.
also not safe for your own emotional well-being.
Mhm. Yeah, and also, talking about those social consequences, and I think that you can probably say more about this as a mother, but
Mhm.
there are consequences of like, there are doctors and child welfare services and
Yeah.
people that will take your kids away.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think that that's a reality that we shouldn't sugarcoat or overlook. Um,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, and I'm so sorry that you went through that, Shy, with both the doxing and also
Yeah.
the fat shaming and the whorephobia. And I just want to say that I think that celebrating big bodies, right? Celebrating sexy big bodies probably saves more lives than all of the fat shaming in the entire
Oh,
medical community combined.
absolutely. And I also wanna say, because I'm also a fat person, and I wanna say that, like, there's nowhere that I have felt more, like, beautiful and more accepted than in the sex work community.
Yeah, and that's something else that really struck me about Shai's story was, the wanting to get into this work for a long time, feeling called to it, and
Mhm.
finding celebration within it. And I don't think that anything that
Right.
any doctor or judgmental whatever says to you should diminish the truth of that feeling.
And that's something that I hear from a lot of sex workers, not just about fat, but about anything, is that we live in this culture that has very narrowly defined beauty standards. And what I found when I entered into this industry, and what a lot of other people have found, is that like desire is so much more expansive than what we're given,
Mm.
and there's space for beauty of all bodies in ways that I think that in our like conventional culture isn't celebrated in the same way as it is in the sex industry.
Yeah, agreed.
Next, we can move to Lita.
My name is Lita Lecherous. I am a professional dominatrix of 4 years, phone sex operator, professional BDSM and fetish model, porn, everything, full service. I do it all. I have a very unique experience with being out in my work life. I am out to my family. I am out to my friends. At my last vanilla job, most of my coworkers knew that I was a dominatrix. They did not know about other things that I did. Coming out to my family was a little weird at first. My mother was the first person I came out to. She called me on the phone one day and told me some crazy dreams she had about me being in she had a dream that I was in a band and I was on stage and I was wearing leather and I was whipping these men. And she was like, I just think that'd be so cool. I don't know. I had this dream about you. And that was when I said, okay, well, mom, I at this time I was working in a fetish house and doing femdom phone sex on Night Flirt. So I kind of just told my mom, like, well, mom, I do those things to men.
That's amazing. I'm sorry.
She didn't seem very surprised. I think I've always been.
I'm sorry. I just want to say that's amazing, right? Like, so Mom, I'm coming out to you as a sex worker, but you're coming out to me as a witch. So this is amazing. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to, yeah.
I had a vision. You were whipping men and
Spot on, dude. Yeah, wow. Whew, we are connected. And then I love that. My mother also tries to communicate to me in dreams. Like, so yes, I have so much. Yes, I am aggressively here for it, Lita. And I just wanted to get that joke in there about, like, you might be telling your mom that you're a sex worker, but your mom is telling you that she's a witch, and that's
Love it.
awesome.
Okay.
And a little unconventional. Okay, I know I've always been a little unconventional. I've always been the weirdo my entire life. And I think that created space in everyone's brains for this is just another part of who I am. My dad knows. All of my friends know. I made a decision at a certain point when I shifted from femdom only into doing pornography that I would be open and honest about my job, because I didn't want to deal with any discomfort of somebody finding out about my job and just living in secrecy. So that was my choice. Mm-hmm. And I know that not everyone feels safe or has the privilege to make the choice to be out. Sex workers have taught me a lot about myself and how to navigate life, how to take care of myself, how to care for other people, how to have compassion for other people. And a big part of why I am so open about my job is because of the stigma around sex work that kills. It ruins people's lives. And I have the privilege. I am very fortunate to have relationships with my family and friends, to have the courage and be open and honest about who I am and what I do. And that is another reason why I'm so open, because of all of the stigma and all of the people that do not have that privilege, that would be disowned by their families or homeless or, killed if somebody knew what they did. Now, that's not to say I'm not careful. I am careful about who I tell. My legal name remains private. I think it's important for those of us who are able to live our truth so openly to use that privilege to talk to civilians about sex work and to educate the people around you about sex work. I think the only thing most of my family doesn't know is that I do full service. And that's mostly because my family they don't want to know what I'm doing in my videos. They don't want to know what I'm doing with my clients. That's just a boundary.
Thank you.
To say that you do sex work isn't necessarily to disclose exactly what that looks like.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like there are boundaries. Like, I'm not ashamed of the sex that my parents have, but I don't need to know about it. Right. Like,
yeah.
And I think that's like, right. There's like a difference between like being erased, right. And having your experience diminished and having boundaries. And I think that is a hard, that's hard. It's harder than it sounds.
Right.
Yeah. And I have so much empathy. And I certainly did this myself as like a young person in my journey coming out, of like going too hard the other way, of like, I think especially in those early years of like just being out and being like, well, what we're going to talk about next is pegging at the dinner table because I feel reactive. I really appreciated Lita's acknowledgement of her privilege, but I don't want that privilege to diminish. There are a lot of privileged closeted sex workers out there. And it doesn't really matter how much privilege you have it's still a brave and bold decision that I think should be celebrated. So Talita, I want to say that I am thrilled for you and your supportive family and healthy boundaries, and I just don't want to diminish the work that you are doing on behalf of all of us, of just simply living your life out loud.
Yeah, I think that they're right to bring up the fact that, sex work stigma kills sex workers. So the work that out sex workers can do to demystify and destigmatize and normalize the lives of sex workers is like really important political work.
100%.
That doesn't actually require us talking about pegging.
True.
So, yeah, I think there is like a delicate balance. This is a hard line to walk. Acknowledging like how difficult that line is and the sorts of decisions that you have to make in all of your interactions. And I mean that came out of Shy's too, like going back to what she was saying, is that the thing about having a stigmatized job is that you make a million decisions all the time about how you're going to frame that for other people.
Yeah. Lita's absolutely right. Stigma kills, and the only thing that can fight it is our stories.
Okay, so let's go on to Zoe.
Okay, so coming out for me has been a privilege that I've been fortunate to have a few times. I started sex work in 2012 and I came out as bisexual in 2013. And in my work, I feel like it opened up my expression. It opened up my sexuality, my ability to connect with people. I found a really supportive community of bisexual sex workers when I came out, and found, I don't know, like a little corner, and I make like bisexual content. I'm just really proud of being bisexual, and it's never been a hindrance and only opened up my world, professionally and otherwise. So that was lucky for me. I'm really grateful for that. Coming out as a sex worker, I'd come out early to a few close friends, and they were always really supportive. Like, I haven't had any negative coming out experiences with friends. I began coming out to family maybe when I was like close to 3 years doing sex work full time. It was somewhat positive. My mother was just really misinformed about sex work and had a lot of preconceived notions, not based in reality, obviously, misconceptions about what sex work really is and what sex workers do. But eventually she came around. The rest of my immediate family, it wasn't all great. I realized that there was a lot of underlying shame within my immediate family regarding me doing sex work. So I had to deal with that. And there was some drama and there were some difficult times, but I got through that. And the rest of my family was really supportive. People that I wouldn't even expect to be supportive of me being a sex worker, like the elders in my family. My great uncle has always been really vocally supportive of me doing sex work.
Awesome.
When I came out, and I would like talk about my experiences, like very sparingly here and there, and he would like post songs and things and be like, you go, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. So that's been really great for me. And then I came out again as trans like 2 years ago, and I've been like slowly coming out. I was afraid at first because I'd spent so long living and working as a woman and catering to mostly men, who are looking for certain things like performing femininity, in all possible ways to a very high degree, and just fulfilling those demands of me. I was worried about not being able to do those things anymore, losing my audience, losing my work, not being desirable or interesting to any of my peers, and like not fitting in. But I've experienced so much warmth and so much love from my community. I realize that I have absolutely nothing to lose and absolutely everything to gain from being my authentic self. And I'm so happy that I came out.
That warms my heart.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say. It's just so lovely.
Yeah, that's just, it's so warm and like I love that you're bi too. Like you know, like yeah, I'm just so happy to listen to somebody else who's so happy about their negotiated and discovered gender identity and sexuality, and the infinite space that sex work provides for all kinds of people to come together and explore that. And I think it's really beautiful, that Zoe is able to reflect on that and embrace themselves more wholeheartedly. And I just want to give a shout out to like cool, uncreepy, supportive uncles everywhere, because they're out there and they're doing the Lord's work, and fist bump.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing to me. I actually, I in my own family have come to a place where, like, people pretty much ignore it, but I have never had anybody be like that.
Yeah.
And that's like pretty amazing to me. I also want to give a shout out to clients here and customers, because one of the things that's striking about Zoe's story, I think, is that when they were afraid to come out and change their presentation and their gender identity, part of that was losing business, and that's not what happened. What actually happened is that so many people in the community, including customers and clients, contributed to their top surgery fund and showed like a ton of support. And the fact that we're in this community that isn't just our peers, but also the people who support us and will support us through different periods of our lives is really amazing too.
Agreed. Yeah.
We're coming up to our last story now.
I don't think I actually have like a traditional coming out story as a sex worker, and honestly I don't even know if there is like a traditional, air quotes, traditional way. But I knew that sex work was something that I was very interested in for a while. And I had an opportunity a few years ago to step into work as a pro dom. I was married and I approached my husband about doing pro dom work, and he was extremely supportive, which I know isn't the typical thing that we're conditioned as femme presenting humans to be able to go to one spouse and say, hey, I would like to be a pro dominant and do sex work. But he was extremely supportive, and I just knew that it was something that I was deeply drawn to. As a lifestyle dominant, my job in a way it's about my pleasure, but there's still a certain aspect of it that the negotiation, right? Negotiating to get to the point where you're doing your thing. And so this idea of being a pro dominant and still having to go through the negotiation process and to create these snapshots, these moments in time between me and a client felt powerful. It felt like something that I really, really wanted to do. I was really drawn to it. This idea of co-creating these moments, and that I'm a practitioner of this thing was huge. I feel really fortunate that I had I had and continue to have amazing um, mentors in that have been doing this for much longer than I have, that I was able to go to and get lots of advice and really create something that felt authentic to me. And I'm out to the world in essence because of a lot of the other work that I do and how vocal I am about being pro ho. I'm pro ho because I am. And at this point in my journey with sex work, a lot of my sex work right now is geared towards queer folks and gender nonconforming folks and non-binary folks that really need some sort of catharsis through BDSM. And that has kind of been the spot that I've landed in terms of my sex work, is providing catharsis and helping folks through their shame surrounding their sexuality and their needs. I think of my work as a sex worker as healing work. It's body work. It's something that I'm not ashamed of, and just it's something that I'm good at. It's something that I'm really good at, and it's really nice to be able to say that without the pangs of shame or guilt or what have you. I am proud of the work that I do and the connections with folks that I get to make, even in those moments, these small snapshots, these moments of mindfulness where we get to be immersed in the play,
Mm.
immersed in the action, the touch, the feel, all of that. I guess it's beautiful.
Yeah. It is, I mean, it is beautiful. Pucks
It is
is
beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, Pucks is absolutely right, and they are, a genius and, an accomplished, performer and healer and community organizer. I wanna give Pucks's, podcast a shout out. Sexuality, spelled TEA, is an excellent conversation between pucks and folks that they're in community with, talking about exactly this. You know, the
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Mhm.
sexuality and gender and finding peace and gratitude uh, within yourself and your work. And I think that's a big part of the work that we do, is sort of
Yeah.
transcending destigmatization, right? Getting
Right.
our parents
Mhm.
and our partners to a place where it's okay, and
Right.
then
Mhm.
going a step further and being able to celebrate the work that we have every right in the world to be proud of.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I loved about their contribution
Mm.
because, you know, most of what we've been talking about is how do we get people on our page, but what they did is took that a step like further and talked about why we're even doing this in the first place,
Yeah.
like um what we contribute to society. So instead of just being like, we should be able to do this without being exiled from our families or without,
Mhm.
never being able to work another job again or all of the or having our
Mhm.
kids taken away or all of the other consequences that come from the stigma of sex work. But more than that, like w- we should do it because it's an important service to the world and
Yeah.
it is, and I very much believe that, and I love how they articulated that.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. And I have the privilege of being able to work with Pucks on the Old Pro project coming up. They're our city coordinator in Seattle, and
Mhm.
I just want to say that I I see and feel and experience the depth of the work that Pucks has done to get themselves here. And I think
Mhm.
that is, we shouldn't underestimate that or diminish it. It takes a lot to be able to live your life with this kind of unapologetic self-acceptance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's inspiring.
It makes me feel good to know that there are people in the world like them who take the work that they're doing, um, and I don't want to overuse this, but I do feel this way, and I have felt this in my own work as like sacred work, as healing work, as work
Mm-hmm.
that's important. And you and I have had this conversation
Mm-hmm.
before, when we talked on another episode where we talked about the fact that our work is closer to like magic than it
Mm-hmm.
is to um other things. And I very much like both resonate with that and appreciate bringing that to this conversation and bringing
Yeah.
that to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that's a part of our history. Temples
Mhm.
and brothels and theaters share a common ancestor. And that
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
the temples of Ishtar with the sacred priestess prostitutes practicing very explicitly and unapologetically and obviously in these
Mhm.
ancient societies the incredible magical healing power of sex energy.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean sexuality is like such a deep like part of ourselves, and living in a culture that is so repressive and so sex negative
Hmm.
has really damaging effects. So
Yeah.
being able to connect with somebody who will allow you to express those very like deep parts of yourselves and allow you to experience them is it can be totally life-changing.
I do want to take a moment and just sort of like a message to my younger self. Like Puck's mentioned
Mhm.
this. I think you and I are very grateful for our incredibly and possibly exceptionally supportive partners
Yeah.
in doing this
Mhm.
work and doing it publicly. But I do reject the notion that it's like super rare, right? Like sex workers have been
Yeah.
finding partners for all of human
Yeah.
history.
Mhm.
Like I married an Eagle Scout. He's great. He cooks for me. Like, I know PJ does their stuff. It's like
Yeah.
don't fall into this trap of like, oh, anyone that partners with me is like doing this exception. Like, yes,
Right.
you deserve that.
I am a married sex worker who's out about my marriage. Not
Mhm.
all sex workers are out about their marriage, and there's
True.
lots of good reasons for that. It's not always good for business, you know? And so,
Yeah, unless you're
uh
willing to market in a completely different direction, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And
It's
so I
not
think
hot if your husband knows. Like,
right, yeah. I get that all the time, especially on, like, cam. People will say, like, "Are you married?" Because I wear a wedding ring. It's, like, very obvious that I'm married. Yes, and then they'll be like, "Does he know?" He's downstairs, like, grading his papers.
right. The sexy answer is no, but the real answer is yeah, obviously. Like, how do you think this works? Like, we're in quarantine. Like, what? How do you think this is happening? Right. But yeah.
Right, but I think, there's a lot of reasons not to disclose that. Some are safety, some are
Mhm.
marketing, some are, privacy, some are work-life separation. There's
Yep.
all sorts of reasons, and so oftentimes, clients not only clients, but also just the outside world, the sex work Twitter world, isn't aware of the personal lives of sex workers,
Mhm.
and many of us are married,
Yes.
and many of us are in long-term
Yes. Like
relationships.
so many choices of like partnership and intimacy when navigating sex work are valid, right? Like lots
Yeah,
of us
right.
have supportive partners. We are out, we don't hide our stuff. And lots of us are in long-term committed relationships with partners that know less about what it is that we do. One of my personal
Yeah.
heroes, and I think the story is so funny. Alex Andrews from Swap Behind Bars, which is an
Yeah, yeah.
incredible
Mhm.
organization, right? And if you have an opportunity to donate to them, you should. But for Alex Andrews is married to this amazing man. I've had an opportunity to meet him. He's this like good old boy from down south, and for like the first year of their relationship, Alex Andrews like runs shit in the sex worker rights world, and he
Oh, yeah.
thought that she was just going to like all these hairstyle conferences. Like just like over and over again, Alex is like going to Las Vegas and New Orleans and New York to like hang out with other hairstylists. And finally it came out and he was like, "Yeah, I don't care." But for years, that was a part of it. And I
He's like, "He must be very good at hair."
yeah, you must be this is I mean, really I did not know how intense the world of hair care was, but I love that. I love that story, and they're happy and together. But there are lots of different ways and processes of coming out to those folks in our lives, and I don't want to diminish the risk and fear of that, but I do want to celebrate the freedom on the other side of surrounding yourself with a community that already knows.
Yeah, I mean, I used to work pretty closely with somebody for a while, and I thought the whole time that she was childless until I was having a hard time with one of my kids. And then I was talking about it, and she said, so, insert sex worker name, has no kids, but I do, and this has been my experience, and there was something, like, really beautiful about that, like, disclosure and her, like, coming to me as a person outside of her sex work community, to
Yeah.
offer community, but, our lives are complicated, and I've chosen to be out about both being married and being a mother, but, um, not doing so is also a valid choice, and there's a lot of reasons to make any of those choices.
Yeah. Life is complicated. We're
Mhm.
complicated.
That's why I think it was important for both of us in
Mhm.
planning this episode to not just talk about our own coming outs, but to bring in the stories of, our colleagues and other people that
Mhm.
we respect within the community because we all have to make our own choices.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peepshow podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.